The Château de Valcroix, the lost souls of the Carpathians. Deep in the heart of the Carpathians, where the mist never fully lifts and the wind howls like tormented souls, stands the Château de Valcroix, an ancient fortress long forgotten by time. The villagers from the surrounding valleys refuse to speak of it, averting their gaze whenever its cursed shadow stretches over the frozen land. Those who dare to approach claim to hear whispers carried by the wind, muffled prayers and screams that seem to come from beyond the grave. But no one truly knows what happened behind its blackened stone walls. Only legends remain, and one of them tells the story of Count Lothaire de Valcroix, a nobleman from the 14th century, as wealthy as he was cruel. He hosted endless banquets in the chateau's grand hall, feasting under golden chandeliers and stained glass windows tinted with the hues of blood. But behind these lavish celebrations lay a far darker truth. Lothaire was obsessed with eternal youth. It is said that he struck a pact with a dark entity, one that promised him immortality at a terrible price. He was to offer the souls of the innocent in sacrifice, and so, deep within the chateau, behind a door sealed with ancient symbols, lay a cursed sanctuary, where the agonized cries of his victims never ceased. One by one, the young villagers began disappearing in the dead of night, their souls ripped from their bodies and imprisoned forever within the castle's stones. But the curse soon turned against the Count himself. On the night of a full moon, as he prepared to complete yet another ritual, a freezing wind howled through the halls. The torches flickered and died. Then a voice echoed through the vast chamber, a voice not of this world. "Lothaire, you have betrayed the balance of the world. What you have taken, you must return." The legend says that the tormented souls of his victims awoke and turned against him. The walls of the chateau shook violently, and an inhuman scream echoed across the valley. When the villagers arrived the next morning, the fortress was deserted. No bodies, no trace of the Count, but the air was heavy with the suffocating presence. Since that night, those who wander too close to Valcroix disappear. Others swear they have seen Lothaire's spectral figure, wandering through the ruins, his eyes burning with an otherworldly glow, condemned to haunt the chateau for eternity. Visitors have reported hearing her wailing behind the walls, voices whispering forgotten pleas, and her shadowy figures watching them from the corners of their vision. No one has ever dared to open the sealed door in the chateau's underground chamber. But an old manuscript found in a nearby monastery foretells that once every 100 years, the door will open on its own, releasing the imprisoned souls and awakening the beast that slumbers beneath Valcroix. The 100 years are nearly upon us, and the wind already howls stronger over the Carpathians. Would you dare to step inside? The Tunnel of Screams, the curse of the burned girl. Deep in the forests of Ontario, hidden among the towering trees, there lies an old, forgotten tunnel. To most, it's nothing more than a relic of the past, just crumbling stone and darkness. But those who have dared to approach after midnight know the truth. The tunnel is not empty. It is haunted by something that never left, something that still screams. Over a century ago, a man and his daughter, Eliza, lived in a small wooden cabin near the forest. He was a cruel man, quick to anger, his temper fueled by whiskey and rage. Eliza, fragile and quiet, had learned to survive by staying out of his way. But that night, she made a mistake. A shattered water jug. That's all it took. The crash echoed through the cabin, and the moment she heard it, she knew she had seconds to run. Her father's roar shook the walls, his footsteps thundering behind her as she bolted into the night, her bare feet slamming against the cold earth. She ran, without thinking, past the trees, through the thick underbrush, straight into the on-tunnel. It was supposed to be her hiding place, her sanctuary, but this time it became her tomb. Her father followed, his breath ragged, his hands shaking with fury. The flame of his torch flickered as he stepped into the tunnel, his shadow stretching long and monstrous against the stone walls. Then he saw her. Eliza stood frozen, her eyes wide with terror, his lips curled into a cruel smile. He lifted the oil canister. "If you love the dark so much, let it have you." Oil splattered across the stone floor, onto her dress, her trembling hands. The torch dropped from his fingers. A second of silence. Then, the tunnel came alive with flames. Eliza's screams shattered the night, twisting through the air like a blade. She clawed at the floor, the walls, trying to crawl away from the fire eating at her skin, but there was no escape. The heat turned the tunnel into an inferno, the flames swallowing her whole. And then, nothing. By the time the smoke cleared, her father was gone. So was Eliza. But the tunnel was never the same. The years passed. Stories spread through the village. People who walked by at night claimed they could hear whispers coming from the darkness. Others swore they saw a shadow at the tunnel's entrance, a charred figure standing still, watching. Then came the screams. At exactly midnight, a terrible, blood-curdling scream would arise from the tunnel. Eliza's final cry, still echoing through time, trapped in an endless moment of agony. Some thought it was just a legend, a ghost story to scare children. Until Michael stepped inside. It was Halloween night, and Michael's friends dared him to prove he wasn't afraid. The challenge? Enter the tunnel alone. Turn off the flashlight. Stay inside for 1 minute. He smirked, acting unfazed. Easy. His footsteps echoed as he walked deeper into the tunnel. Cold air wrapped around him. When he turned off the flashlight, the darkness swallowed everything. For a few seconds there was nothing but silence. Then he heard it. Small, bare footsteps. Shuffling closer. He swallowed hard. His breath quickened. "Guys?" His voice barely made a sound. The footsteps stopped. Something brushed his ear. A whisper. "Why did you let me burn?" The flashlight clicked on, and she was there. A blackened figure, hollow, empty eyes, a small outstretched hand. Michael screamed. The light went out. When his friends found him outside the tunnel, he was pale, trembling, his lips moving in a whisper only they could barely hear. She's still there, and she's waiting. The tunnel remains untouched to this day. Locals say it is cursed, that it traps the souls of those who enter. Some say, if you go at midnight and listen carefully, you'll hear a voice calling your name. But if you feel a breath against your ear, don't turn around. Because you might see her, and your scream will join the others. Fire emoji, eye emoji. Robert the Cursed Doll. The haunting eyes that never blink. In Key West, Florida, behind a thick glass case in the East Martello Museum, sits an old sailor-dressed doll, its glass eyes staring as if they can see straight into your soul. But this is no ordinary doll. It is a vessel for something dark, something alive. A nightmare that has lasted for over a century. In 1906, Robert Eugene Otto, a young boy from a wealthy family, received a doll as a gift from his housemaid, a woman rumored to practice black magic. No one knew the dark secret hidden within the doll, nor the curse it carried. From the moment the boy laid his hands on it, an unnatural bond formed. He named it after himself, calling it Robert, and refused to be separated from it. Then the strange occurrences began. At first, the boy's parents heard whispers coming from his room at night. Conversations as if two people were speaking. Yet their son was alone. When they asked him about it, he simply said, "I wasn't talking alone. Robert was whispering to me." Soon after, objects began moving on their own. Furniture shifted at night. Doors slammed shut without explanation. But the moment that convinced them something was truly wrong happened when their son ran into their room one night, trembling, screaming. Robert moved. He was looking at me, and he was laughing. His father stormed into the room, only to find the doll sitting on a chair, its head tilted slightly to the side, its glassy eyes locked onto him, watching. From that night on, no one in the house dared to be alone with Robert. As the boy grew into a man, he refused to part with the doll. Even after he got married, he kept it, placing it in the attic. But the doll had no intention of being forgotten. Neighbors began noticing shadows moving behind the windows. When no one was home, some swore they saw the doll staring at them from the attic window before vanishing. But no one was more terrified than Eugene's wife. One night, she awoke to the sound of sharp scratching on the attic walls. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding. Just as she was about to wake her husband, she heard something worse. A small giggle, the laugh of a child that wasn't there. She froze. Then the attic door creaked open, and sitting on the floor, just inside the doorway, was the doll. Its head was turned directly toward her, its glass eyes locked onto hers, an eerie, knowing smile on its fabric face. She screamed. She begged her husband to get rid of it, but he refused, insisting, "He's my friend. I can't leave him alone." But deep down, he knew something was very, very wrong. After Eugene's death, the doll was donated to the East Martello Museum, where it remains locked inside a glass case. But its curse was far from over. Visitors who take a photo without asking permission have reported strange accidents, sudden illnesses, and even death. The museum now receives letters of apology from those who ignored the warning, desperate to undo the misfortune that followed them. But does Robert ever forgive? No one knows. All we do know is this: if you ever visit the museum and you feel its eyes shifting toward you, ask permission before taking a photo, because if you don't, you may not like what happens next. The Shadow Man in the Abandoned Prison, the Curse of Lost Justice. Deep in the English countryside, where thick fog blankets the cobbled streets and the sun rarely breaks through, stands Blackwell Prison, one of the oldest prisons in the country. Built in the 18th century as a fortress of justice, it gradually transformed into a graveyard for the living, a place where both criminals and innocents met their end. But among them, there was one man who refused to be forgotten. Historical records tell of a case that shocked the public in the late 19th century, the case of Edward Murray. He was a respected man, known for his relentless work as a defense attorney, but he never imagined that his pursuit of justice would make him a victim of a carefully orchestrated conspiracy. In 1886, the body of a wealthy man, Thomas Callahan, was found murdered in his home, and suspicion quickly fell upon one of his servants. The accused insisted he was merely a witness to the crime, not the perpetrator. Edward Murray took up his defense, convinced that the evidence was fabricated and that the true killer was someone among the corrupt elite, who wanted the case closed as quickly as possible. What Murray did not realize was that the servants were pawns in a much larger game, one that had no room for truth-seekers. Within a week, Edward himself was arrested for Callahan's murder. The evidence he had gathered disappeared, witnesses changed their testimonies, and within weeks, he was convicted and sentenced to death without a fair trial. On a freezing winter morning, he was led to the gallows inside Blackwell Prison. As the sentence was read, he did not scream or beg. He simply stood still before uttering his final words. "I am innocent, but human justice is flawed. I will return. I will return to prove the truth." The moment his body dropped, the prison was plunged into darkness. A sudden, unnatural cold wind swept through the stone corridors, and some guards swore they heard a whisper from nowhere. "This is not the end." From that day forward, the prison was never the same. After its closure in the mid-20th century, strange occurrences began to be reported. Adventurous visitors who sneaked in claimed they felt something watching them from the darkness. Others swore they saw a tall shadow drifting between the cells, only to vanish into the stone walls. One night, a paranormal investigation team entered the prison with infrared cameras and motion detectors. For hours, nothing happened, just an eerie silence. But at 3:00, one of the cameras captured a dark figure moving slowly through the corridors before stopping in front of a particular cell. Edward Murray's cell. Then, in a chilling moment, the shadowy mass rushed into the stone wall and disappeared. At the same time, the microphone picked up a faint whisper, barely discernible, but it sounded like, "Where is justice?" One of the investigators, standing near the cell, felt an invisible hand grasp his coat and pull him backward. When he turned around, no one was there. In 2019, a thrill seeker named Michael Harris decided to document his experience inside the abandoned prison for a live broadcast. He entered the rusted iron doors, unaware of what awaited him. At first he laughed and joked, even calling out into the darkness, "Edward Murray, if you're here, show yourself." There was no reply. But when he stepped into the infamous haunted cell, things began to change. An unexplainable cold surrounded him, despite the mild weather, and he heard slow, deliberate footsteps behind him. His camera captured a tall black silhouette at the end of the corridor, which suddenly melted into the walls. Moments later, the camera shook violently before the lights went out. In the darkness, a loud thud was heard, followed by Michael's panicked scream. "Something is pulling me." By morning, he was found sitting in the corner of the cell, staring into nothingness, his hands trembling. He refused to speak about what happened, but later he posted online. Some mistakes are never forgiven, and some souls never forget injustice. The prison remains closed, but the locals refuse to go near it after dark. Some swear they have seen a tall shadow standing behind the broken windows, while others hear whispers echoing from within. But the most terrifying reports come from those who dared to stand in front of Edward Murray's cell. They returned home only to find words scratched onto their walls. Words that read, "Justice has not been served." Is this just a legend? Or did Edward Murray never truly leave? If you ever think about visiting Blackwell Prison, remember one thing. If you feel something watching you, do not turn around. Because you may see a man who is